Well, greetings, church family. Today's daily Bible reading had us in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Of course, an incredibly popular and familiar chapter of Scripture, David versus Goliath. In verses 1 through 11, especially verse 4, we see that Goliath was a monster of a man. A cubit was about 18 inches, and a span was the distance between your thumb and your pinky when your hand is spread out like this. And so that would be about another 8 to 10 inches. So Goliath was about 9 feet, 9 inches tall, right around that size. And his gear, of course, was understandably heavy. Such a big guy like that wearing it, a shekel would have been roughly half an ounce. So Goliath's bronze scale armor was about 150 pounds. Just imagine carrying that kind of weight. If you've done any kind of hiking or if you're in the military, a 50-pound sack, that in itself is heavy on the back after a while. 150 pounds, 3 times that, means that he was strong. His spear was about 12 to 15 feet long, like a weaver's beam, the scripture said, with an iron head that would have weighed as much as 18 pounds. Just think about 18 pounds. That is a heavy bowling ball on the tip of this spear. So not only was Goliath tall, but he must have been quite strong and athletic to carry around all that gear and battle in it. So no wonder verse 11 is true. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid as he comes out to challenge one-on-one combat, a representative battle, which would then, of course, lead to one side most likely defeating the other. Verses 12 through 19, the Valley of Elah, where the Philistines and Israelites arrayed for battle, was roughly 10 miles from Bethlehem. And so apparently David alternated between serving Saul as his personal musician and taking care of his father Jesse's sheep in his hometown. And David was tasked by his father to make the 20-mile round trip to Elah to give some supplies to his 3 eldest brothers who were part of Saul's army, of course. In verse 16, look there with me. We see that the Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. It's interesting to note that. Just imagine how disheartening and demoralizing it would be to hear this giant's boast day in and day out for 40 straight days, knowing that there's no one in Israel who could match Goliath pound for pound, who could go toe-to-toe with him unless, of course, the Lord willed it. And there just must have been a stunning lack of trust in the Lord on behalf of the Israelites. Day in and day out, they're hearing this boasting, and they're just being disheartened. And if you've seen any kind of sports, you know how much momentum can make a big deal. Just imagine all the momentum before this battle building and building in the favor of the Philistines, who would have been excited to see their champion go out there and challenge the Israelites, and the Israelites wilt away. In verses 20 through 30, David hears Goliath's boasting firsthand, and he also hears the rumored prize for taking down the giant, Saul's own daughter in marriage, as well as riches and benefits for the family, to be free from service, free from taxation later in life. In verse 26, notice how David is indignant that this Goliath should be left unopposed when he dared defy not the armies of Israel. Notice what he refers to them to, the armies of the living God. David cares more for God's glory than his own. And the same holds true when David faces the giant in verses 31 through 58. God has already proved his might and glory through using David to defeat both lion and bear and protecting real physical sheep. And now the Lord's going to use his own might and glory through David to defeat a more dangerous foe and protect an even more important flock, the people of Israel, God's own sheep. And David trusts God completely to do this very thing. Now, David, of course, can't fit Saul's armor, which allows the Lord to yet again prove even more so that his strength is even greater. It's going to be an unarmed combatant who takes down Goliath because of the power of the Lord. And notice that when the Philistine taunts David, David does not take it personally. Rather, he's defending whose honor? The Lord's. He cares not that his own name would be known, but that Yahweh's would. Look there with me in verses 45 through 47. David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted." It's God that's been taunted by Goliath. "This day Yahweh will deliver you up into my hands. I will strike you down, remove your head from you. I'll give the dead bodies of the army of the Israelites this day to the birds of the sky, the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, that all this assembly may know that Yahweh does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is Yahweh's. He will give you into our hands." And indeed, that's exactly what happens. David doesn't run away from the Philistine, but rather runs towards him as the Philistine draws near, picks up a single stone to use. He has 5 of them, but he only needs 1, and it takes down the giant from his sling. Now, the text seems like it's saying that David killed Goliath twice in verses 50 and 51, that the stone killed him and then he cut his head off. But most likely what's going on is verse 50 is declaring that David struck the Philistine with a single stone and eventually killed him, with that final stroke coming in verse 51 when David lops off Goliath's head with the giant's own sword. And since it was a representative duel, the Israelites follow suit, chase after the Philistines. They defeat them into their own territory, and David's family, Jesse's house in Bethlehem, is going to be blessed by Saul because of David's defense of the Lord's honor in the valley of Elah. Now, may you and I be, this is the big principle from this, may you and I be just as desirous to stand for the Lord's honor as David was in opposing Goliath, willing to risk it all to be used by him for his glory and not caring whether our own name would be lifted up, wanting his name to be known, the one true God. Just as Psalm 145, 8 through 13 says, Yahweh is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and great in loving kindness. The Lord Yahweh is good to all, and his mercies are over all his works. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Yahweh, and your godly ones shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and talk of your power, to make known to the sons of men your mighty acts and the glory of the majesty of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. Let's live lives, both in private and public, that would make this true, that would sing forth of God's kingdom, of his glory, of his might, of his works. This has been 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I hope you have a great day.